For me, in 1963, I was 18 years old and I went to a movie. Uh, kicked my feet under the seat in front of me and there was a sack there, a plain brown wrapper. I opened it up and there were several magazines in it. This is 1963. And one of them was a nudist magazine called Sundial, which was one of the official nudist magazines of that era. So I wrote to the, what used to be called, it's called the American Association of Nude Recreation now. It used to be called the ASA, American Sunbathing Association. So I wrote to them. They sent it to the closest club to my home in Des Moines, which happens to be Minneapolis. And about the next summer, thereabouts, I got a letter from some of the managers and the original founders of the club. And I first came here in 1966. And have been, my current wife and I have been members since 1970. So 49 years for me, 45 years for my wife and I.
How do you think that sack got into the movie theater?
Well, back then, anything that, interestingly, the photographs in the early 60s were permitted except for the pubic area, and that had to be what was called airbrushed out. So the people actually looked like aliens from another planetary system.
Yeah.
But it was right on the cutting edge, and the 60s were starting to open up, openness and so forth. So it was part of the 60s, as a matter of fact, the liberation of that era.
So somebody just forgot it? And
Somebody just left it there.
Ah.
It never seemed, it always seemed exotic to me, but it never seemed as bad as what some people may have thought. So I wrote a letter and first came here in 1966.
Right. And what was it about what you saw in that magazine that made you want to come here? Made you want to...
Just the concept, yeah, there were no pictures of anyone here. It was just the concept of nudism. What does that mean to the average person? And to me, growing up in the 60s, it meant part of liberation. To me, it means part of things like the preamble of the Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It just made sense to me from the very onset.
With freedom as pretty strong component of how it was making sense.
The number one component is freedom. The number two component is physical and mental health, and the number three is friendships. And over the years, my wife and I have collected testimonials from about 200 nudist couples, and we've documented, written them down. And about 80% of the people we talk to mention freedom, mention friendship. The number one rule, about 80% mention the friendships that are created, and about 70% mention freedom. So friendships, freedom, both are very close to being the primary reason people become nudists.
Yeah. Now, it sounds like you have a sort of scholarly relationship to this enterprise also.
Well, for me, for having been a nudist as long as I have, and my belief is that it is not just a recreation, I think it is a philosophy of life that is very meaningful. Particularly when you look in the world and see things like burqas and so forth. Well, I would argue that the polar opposite of a burqa is a nudist club. So it's a part of freedom of expression, very much so. And also, I just bought, incidentally, if anyone would like to learn, this is a book written in 1905 by a German fellow by the name of Richard Ungeleider. That's kind of considered the Old Testament of nudism. And then a huge behemoth, The Nudist Ideal, was written in 2005, and that, 2009, and that is kind of the New Testament. So there's a considerable history to nudism that most people don't realize. And this is just two of probably 50 or 60 books I have.
Right. So, you've watched the development and the history of Avatan probably longer than most anybody, right?
I think I'm the senior old dude here now. I'm 69 and I've been here since 66, so I think so.
Wow. We're close to of an age. noticed over the years? What's happened to this place? How has it evolved or changed or?
Well, we're situated on the same 40 acres that we were in 1962 when we were first chartered by the American Sunbathing Association. The general nature of the people has not changed much. Mostly Minnesotans, mostly people who have at least some element of libertarian thought. In the 70s, the sexual revolution tended to incorporate things like nudism into their objectives, which is not what A&R nudism is all about. So there's been a divergence, and you'll find nudists who are not nudists for sexual reasons at all, and then you'll find a segment that are. So there's been a change there. We topped out at about 2,000, about 300 and some members. We're now down to about 184, so there's been a kind of general decrease in membership. And I don't think it has anything to do with the popularity of the idea so much as people go other places. They fly to Cancun, they fly to Florida, and so forth. Estimates are there's somewhere between 15 and 30 million nudists worldwide, so they go a lot of places. And this club, being as far north as it is, has been a consistently 200 to 250 members, has been profitable without any major concern to anyone who lives around here. It's been generally a consistent club, kind of consistent with Minnesotans, as a matter of fact.
So, if it was 300 as it's at its height, and it's about 180 now, does that mean that there are, 120 spots somehow? How does that translate to what's available?
We can conveniently contain 300 members. It gets a little hard to control on 40 acres, but it's part of it, I think, is just a demographic thing. Baby boomers. I'm 1 year too old to be a baby boomer, but I'm within the framework of baby boomers are getting older. And a lot of the founding members were baby boomers or slightly older than that. They've died. You got a new generation. So it's a demographic thing, I think, more than anything.
Right. Well, I'm central baby boom, and I would think folks in my cohort, I'm 63, would find this outrageously attractive.
They do. In fact, demographically, I would guess when my wife and I first came here in 1970, I would say the median age was about 35. I'd say it's 60 plus now. It's an older generation thing not because people necessarily disapprove of it, but when you've got kids, you're doing baseball and soccer and scouting and all that. And then the empty nesters think, gee, what are we going to do this weekend? And they think, nice place to visit. So for that reason, yeah, guys our age and couples our age are more inclined to be attracted to it.
Yeah, and they had that exposure to these ideas in the 60s and 70s.
Exactly.
Look back to that with a certain nostalgia, and here's now a chance to finally live some of this stuff out.
Yeah.
I should think your recruiting prospects are actually pretty good.
We have been really consistent. We've been a profitable club every year, and you have to make a profit because it's a private corporation. It has been consistent, especially here in Minnesota. There's a certain consistency to it. There's two actual clubs, Oakwood and Avatan. Oakwood's about 5-6 miles from here. And there's a travel club also in Minnesota. But to give you an idea, in Pasco County, Florida, there are 15 clubs just in that county. So one of the things I have seen over the years, a lot of people that 30 years ago would come here, they're now flying to Cancun, they're flying to Florida, they're flying to places. Texas is very popular, there's a number of clubs there. So again, I think that diminution of numbers is probably related to demographics more than anything.
So there are only 2 clubs in Minnesota overall.
2 landed clubs, that's right. Actually, Avatan broke off from Oakwood. Oakwood dates from 1939, back when it was actually illegal to operate a nudist club. And we broke off from them in 1961 and were chartered in 1962.
Isn't it surprising to you when you think about it that other fairly populous areas, I'm thinking Duluth, I'm thinking Rochester, I'm thinking Mankato, haven't generated something like this?
You know, particularly, it's not, it tends to be a tropical weather thing, removing your clothes and having nice weather. But yeah, there's probably a potential for places like that. Again, the further south you get, you generally have bigger numbers. Although it also depends on the demographics and the psychology of the state. Minnesota is a somewhat libertarian, progressive state, I think. Minnesotans have traditionally not been afraid to think outside the box. Jesse Ventura, a Democratic president when everyone else, or governor when everyone else was tilting Republican. Minnesotans have never been afraid to be different. So for whatever that guess is worth, I think that has something to do with it. Areas which are highly conservative or, in my opinion, religiously based probably have a problem with it, whereas a libertarian from the 60s would not.
Yeah.
It's a philosophy of life.
So over the time that you've been a member, how much time have you been able to spend here?
We have spent, I think one year we came up 3 times, which is the least amount of times. That's when the kids were younger. To now where we spend half the summer up here. And we were also active with the travel club in Iowa for years too. That's been dissolved since. But we're here probably at least 2 to 3 months a year. And in this weather, there are times when you only really have nice weather between mid-June and mid-September. So in a cooler than expected winter, we have 14, 16 weeks to be here. The rest of the year is too cold.
Yeah. And just at the level of personal interest, what keeps you mainly coming back?
Well, for me personally, it's an expression of personal and cultural freedom. And when you live a nudist lifestyle, I think, as I said before, I believe it's physically and mentally healthy to be in an environment where the human body is not denigrated and automatically transferred to something sexual or something shameful. And for me, it's a living expression of, as I say, freedom. I reject clannish thinking, tribal thinking, outdated thinking. I personally believe in nothing surreal or otherworldly. It's an earth-based philosophy that is one of peace and contentment, relaxation, friendships, and as I say, freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So this is a place where you can live pretty fully in conformity with your political and, to some extent, spiritual beliefs without having to pretend anything.
Yeah, it is a very unpretentious environment, it is. And the type of people you meet over the years, nowhere that my wife and I have been in 45 years of marriage have we met consistently nicer people than we have here. We'll sometimes drive up, we'll try pull through the gate, and my wife will say, "Nice place." You just get a good feeling in being here. And nudism, after a period of time, creates that. It creates a bond that you don't see in a textile society. And no, it's not all about sex. It has nothing to do with overt sexuality.
So you must have some friendships going back a long ways here.
My longest one is 1966, which is a couple who are no longer here, but they live nearby. So 49 years with my present wife and I have 45 years of friendships.
Yeah. That's a lot of conversations about a lot of topics.
It is. I was on the board of directors for 3 years. I was president last year and the previous year. So I've been involved in the operation of the club as well as the general population here. And it's been work and play, and as I say, a depth of friendships that you, in an unpretentious way, that you don't see in the textile world. You don't see in the conservative world. You don't see in the religious world. It's a freedom that very few people have been able to enjoy, considering 7.5 billion people, and maybe 30 million of them are practicing nudists.
So you have here the fulfillment of the American dream. The promise is elements of the Constitution.
Somewhat the American dream, somewhat the French Revolution, somewhat the Enlightenment, but yeah, you're close.
Neat. So I've gotten various pictures of the relationship between sort of life here and textile life and people's various ways of transitioning back and forth from folks for whom this is a closely guarded secret and a secret they are really very happy about having as a secret to more something that's more continuous and uniform. How does that work for you? The interface between your life away from here and your life here.
Historically, anonymity has been a very important part of nudism. Like, no one here divulges their last name. Over the years, I have become, in my working years, I would have had some concern if one of my employers found out. I don't know that it would have resulted in loss of my job, but it could have. I was honest with my family for years, and I still have the same family. We have become progressively more and more willing to say, yeah, I'm a nudist. I happen to believe in what I do. So yeah, anonymity is important to many people for family and job reasons usually. But coming out and declaring and admitting proudly that you're a nudist is part of what the current campaign with the American Association of Nude Recreation is all about. So that's why I'm willing to sit here with you. Yeah.
So the new direction is to follow a number of other groups out of the closet.
Right.
I see.
Yeah. The three-word tagline for the AANR, American Association of Nude Recreation, right now is "Feel the Freedom," emphasizing the freedom aspect of it. But there are other primary values too that you see, but it's essentially an expression of freedom. And to, as I say, lately in the last few years, there have been people willing to be photographed and put their last name in the bulletin, which is the monthly bulletin of the American Association of Nude Recreation. So yeah, don't be ashamed of it, don't hide it. Challenge those who demonize the human body to prove that their philosophy of life is different from ours, is better than ours. I don't happen to believe it is. Yeah. As I say, this is very philosophical, but in the modern world, one of the most extant reflections of slavery, of submission, is the burqa. The United Nations estimate between 8.5 to 10 million women worldwide after the age of 10 wear a burqa, completely obliterating their identity. The very opposite of that is right here, nudism. It's the opposite of subjugation. It's the opposite of submission. It's the opposite of demonizing the human body. So it's more than just a place to swim, for me.
Yeah, I can see that. You've taken some leadership in this place, and you understand what it needs to succeed and to thrive as a business or as an entity through time. What are your thoughts about leadership? What are your thoughts about where Avatan needs to steer towards, or what's the star it needs to steer by?
What happens is it develops over the years. There's a core of people that come here, and on the fringes is people that visit twice a year for 2 days, and on the core is people who live here May, June, July, August, September, and actually operate the club, from our electricity to our water to paying the taxes, establishing a budget, everything else. And in a club of 200 people, you'll have a core of maybe a dozen people to do 90% of the work. So you have to sustain. It's a physical thing too. There's, as I say, electricity, water, buildings, taxes. It's like operating a small business. But again, about a dozen people out of the club generally do 90% of the work. And then over time, we live 250 miles away. That was always my reason historically for not being on the board of directors. But after you get retired and you have more time, you step up and do your part. And the place is worth it. It's been a little gold mine that's been here since 1962. Back when this area was very remote, very rustic. There's never been a problem with any business or entity anywhere around us. And again, it's part of that libertarian attitude that you see in much of Minnesota. But it evolves over time. As I say, leadership comes from maybe a dozen people out of 200.
I think participation in a church is a little broader than that, but it still is, you know.
It's an analogy.
It's tiny, and people's joining a church as a kind of is generally understood a little differently than the sort of contract one signs as a member here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily clearly joining a community at first.
In my own opinion, and it's nothing but my subjective opinion, I think joining a church and joining a nudist club is, in a certain extent, for the same reasons. People, involvement, becoming part of something.
Yeah. And also presumably flying your flag,
Mm-hmm.
expressing clearly and publicly the values that that you hold.
Churches do that, synagogues do that, mosques do that, nudist clubs do that. And I would compare this place with any institution I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah, that's the uniform picture here.
It creates a psychological bond that's a little difficult to describe because it's, to some extent, I think, subliminal. But a person who is naked is unpretentious. And you get down to not the person who dresses up in a uniform or a suit or anything else, but the purest of persons. You've got just that person and their character to deal with. So it's very unpretentious, and I think that's what develops the bonding over a period of time.
Yeah. You can see that. I mean, there's Parker Palmer's lovely line that in a community, sooner or later, the person you will have the most trouble with ever moves in.
Mm-hmm.
And when that person moves out, someone just like them will replace them.
Over the years, we've had a few butt heads. We have. We've never had any major problems, but we have had members over the years who are not appropriate for this. Yeah. Not very many, actually, but some.
Yeah, so how does it work when somebody comes who just can't, is just not the right fit for this place?
Usually a member of the board of directors goes to that person or couple and says, ABC is inconsistent with our philosophy here. Ask them if they have a concern, do they want to change, or have they misinterpreted what this place is. During the 70s, we had a lot of swingers come here. A&R nudism is not about swinging. We have children here. We have a children's pool. That's the new generation that we need for leadership that you're talking about. But it has really nothing to do with the sexual evolution except the human body. And they merged and then they split apart. So we make a big distinction between, we had a lot of that in the 70s. Come in here, think it was a place for sex. There's no more sex here than there is at this town down the street. It's a family thing that has nothing to do with our being here. So we've seen changes and challenges like that. But if somebody is inappropriate, we show them the gate. And that happens very little because usually if a person comes here and realizes when he sees the kids in the pool, when he sees families, when he sees people in their 80s, or we just lost our oldest member last year, was 95, they suddenly realize, boy, this is not a place where you go for your prurient interests, it's something else. It's a big family, actually, is what it is.
Yeah. I used to belong to a discussion group that protected itself in the sense that no one who wasn't appropriate could stand the pace of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
They just left. You didn't have to tell them they were wrong. They just walked out the door.
I suspect that 9 out of 10 miscreants take the same exit. We never see them again. Yeah.
Well, you may be as close, though, to somebody who can answer the next question as anybody I'll meet. So, what is the spirit of this place? Or to put it another way, who should come here? It's not for everybody. It's not even for every good person.
No,
You
it's
know?
not.
So who should come here?
Boy, that's a good question. First of all, someone who, and again, this is a subjective question, and this is a subjective answer.
Yeah, that's all I can possibly ask for.
Yeah, and I just base it largely on I've been here a long time. The type of person is probably not, I would use the word libertarian, the general philosophy that as long as I'm not bothering you, whatever I do should be none of your business. It's usually someone who is free from controlling mechanisms in the world, philosophies that cover up the body, whatever they might be. There are many people here who are religious faithful, but there are many people who are not. I don't happen to be. To me, it's a divergence from that too. But someone who is looking for a new understanding of their body in relationship to other people. Someone who's not, as I say, not stymied by tradition. They're not locked into ways of thinking that are hundreds or thousands of years old. Someone who's on the progressive is another word that might sort of fit into someone who would come here. Someone who's been liberated. For me, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if you understand that concept, you might want to come here. Again, psychosexual hang-ups do not belong here. In fact, people who grow up as nudists don't have psychosexual hang-ups. They grow up as normal can be. I'd like to think families, because as I say, there's a younger generation. And by the way, I was talking about the 200 people we've interviewed over the years. About over half of those, 55-60%, will mention at some point, I think it's good for kids or good for families. And the general perception is that kids who are raised up without the demonization of the human body, without automatically carrying shame on the body, tend to grow up healthy. So some people do it for kids. You'll see one of the homes over on the west side of our place here has 3 kids there. So they do it for not just personal reasons, but how you develop psychologically in your life. Again, it's a freedom. If you're constrained, you won't like it here. If you like freedom, you'll probably like it.
So you've got the experience to go along with the idea. Is it your experience that this has worked for families?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, for many years, the American Club Bending Association had a mantra, depending on how you pronounce that word, and it was, no man raised from childhood as a nudist has ever been convicted of a sexual crime. All through the 70s and 80s and 90s, that was a mantra of ASA nudism. I haven't heard it in the last decade or so. I don't know whether it's because there's another mantra now, like feel the freedom, or something like that, but there's a general feeling that it produces, and I believe this, I've experienced it, it produces psychosexual health. When you're with people that are unclothed, you have pretense eliminated and you learn to deal with the person honestly. No pretense, just what's in their mind, like you and I, just talking together.
Yeah. Another question that really goes to your experience here. You've talked about all manner of things with all manner of people. Do you find that people who come here from a religious background struggle a bit? Or what happens when somebody who's been raised in a religious tradition that wasn't particularly friendly to nudism, decides to come here but still wants to hang on to their religious convictions? What's that do to them?
In my view, again, my subjective response to that is, yeah, they probably will struggle. And when you look at the extant view of religion, for example, the Catholic faith, the habit covered everything but their face. Look at Islam. Look at the burqa. Most religions, in fact, I don't know of one that historically has been friendly to the nude human body. It's called shame, it's called good taste. It's all the same thing. It's denigrating the human body. It's that natural instinct that there's something bad about certain areas of your body. And the nudist rejects that. They say, I don't believe that. And my lifestyle reflects that. But yes, I think people with a religious background would probably struggle with it more so than someone who does not have that. And there are Christians all over here. And we've had a few Jewish members over the years. Some people don't struggle with it. Some people rationalize it. Some people make it impossible to come here like this.
Yeah.
But historically, the otherworldly religion, again, that's just my opinion, has never been friendly to the human body. It's, for one reason or another, people have been told to cover up.
That's interesting.
Which I call primitive thinking, by the way.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how that goes together.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder where the exceptions are.
This is an almost encyclopedia which helps to deal with that. He wrote a huge book on that very topic. How does it integrate with the average person? Incidentally, another thing to consider too is in Europe, for instance, there are thousands of clubs in Europe, and there's a general feeling like on beaches and places like that throughout much of Europe that the body is not quite as exotic and forbidden as it is here in America. France, for instance, have a city. The entire city is a nude city.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just learning the other day that East Germany was substantially looser about some of these things than West Germany.
Well, social nudism began in Germany right after the turn of the century.
Uh-huh.
It's more of a German philosophy than it is anything else, but it's worldwide.
Right. Well, I was the history of why we're talking today is sort of relevant to all this. I had known some people who were members here and looked at the website after talking to them, and the website has some of the finest pictures of buildings and trees I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
No people.
You pointed out probably a fault on our website. That's right.
And so, but then I started doing some research to see, for instance, how some other people have handled the problem of presenting nudism. And in you know, there's some great German things out there,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing that makes the difference is they've got a lot of people who are willing to be seen nude, doing nude things. So, you know, they can do full-scale documentaries of every aspect of nudist life.
That's right.
And they're splendid pieces of production.
Mm-hmm. I've seen several.
And the question is, you know, the issue is, if the American Association for Nude Recreation is pushing in the direction of more visibility,
Mm-hmm.
are we someday going to see a documentary like that coming out of Avatan?
I would hope so. That's a heck of a good idea. We are not as liberated in some ways here in good old America as we boast about.
Mm-hmm.
Although Avatan's an exception to that. We are liberated here. But yeah, you're right. There are certain areas of the world that it is not nearly as questionable a philosophy of life as it is here.
And probably better protections against getting fired.
Yeah.
For this kind of reason, and a better social safety net if you do,
Mm-hmm.
to make the whole risk of being outed
This
less terrifying.
old gentleman there, 1868 to 1958, is kind of the George Washington of nudism, if you will. He was a German. And the philosophy, as I say, 1905, 2005. But they've been, in Germany, it's been an aspect of German culture since before 1900.
Yeah. And you've studied this, and that's a matter of great curiosity to me. What do you think it means within German culture? I mean, how do you understand the fact that nudism arose there and that it it's been, rooted there in a way that it never has here.
My rough answer to that would be that I think most nations, most cultures have good aspects of their culture and not so good. And they struggle through the years to develop. Germany has been, in some ways, an enlightened nation, and in some ways not, as we, World War II and so forth. But I think it tends to be a society that has been more progressive than in other parts of the world. And again, this is just my answer, nobody else's, but they're not quite so bound by religion. And there were, shortly after the turn of the century, there were many life force organizations in Germany, like health clubs, organizations for spiritual expansion and so forth. And one of those was nudism. So I think it's just probably something unique about the aspect of German culture that is very progressive and very enlightened.
Yeah. I got to ask one other thing, since you know the history. There's a matter I've always been curious about. In the U.S. history, there's a very funny little fact, which is that when the YMCA was founded, people were convinced that the lint from swimming suits would utterly destroy the filtration systems in swimming pools.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made all of the YMCA pools nude. As soon as women were admitted, or as soon as the possibility, a comparable organization for women was founded, as far as I can tell, they immediately found technical solutions to this problem. But there was this history where this utterly central mainline institution in America had this sort of nudist piece that was just understood as a technical necessity. And then it spread to the high schools. So the high schools began to reimagine their pools as being extraordinarily sensitive to lint. And it's a story you just couldn't make up. It's so strange. Have you run into this thing?
I have. In fact, I've read quite a bit on it. Among other things, the YMCA invented basketball, as you probably know. And what I think happened, I've done quite a bit of research on that. What I think happened was that they developed, almost as a surprise to them, a discovery that the human body is not innately a bad thing. And in spite, YMCA means Young Men's Christian Association. And I think they were pulling against those restraints of 1,900 years of religion, discovering that the human body is not innately a bad thing. So they just started to practice what they felt, and then of course the blue bloods came in and changed that. You don't swim naked at the Y anymore, but they used to. That's right. My dad told me that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the pools, the boys swimming in our high school was nude, and I think they picked up the idea from the Y. It was, but it's just kind of incredible that America could be on those two tracks at this point.
Yeah, it's, when I mention things like religion, it's not just religion, it's things like tribal thinking and primitive thinking and all that. But people progressively become more and more, I compare nudism to things like the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, the American Revolution, the revolution of the 60s and early 70s, when the old ways of doing business were challenged. The status quo was no longer sacrosanct. And when you break free from those constraints, no matter what they are, you look for your own anchor point. And one of the things people realize is the human body is innately good. It is not innately bad or innately sexual. And we happen to practice that philosophy here. Many people think it, but they just can't make themselves be part of the nudist community.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of struggle, yeah.